The sound that ended my marriage was a zipper. Not yelling, not a slammed door, not some dramatic scene in the driveway, just the hard, ugly zip of my wife's suitcase upstairs while I sat in the kitchen and realized she was actually doing it. And the worst part was, by then, I already knew she was making a mistake she didn't understand yet. I was sitting at the kitchen island with the cup of coffee I'd stopped drinking 20 minutes earlier, listening to Claire strip our life out of the bedroom one piece at a time. Hangers hitting the closet floor, drawer slides opening and closing, suitcase wheels bumping over the hardwood upstairs, then the muffled drag as she brought everything down the carpeted stairs. It was all so organized. That was what got me. She wasn't emotional. She wasn't torn up. She sounded like somebody checking out of a hotel. When she walked into the kitchen, she looked like she was on her way to close a deal. Navy blazer, cream blouse, heels, makeup done, hair perfect. She didn't look at me like a wife ending a marriage. She looked past me like I was already furniture. Then she reached into her purse and set her house key on the counter, carefully. Right beside it, she placed the garage remote and a folded sticky note. She didn't toss them, didn't slam anything. She made a show of being calm, like that made what she was doing more justified. Then she finally spoke. She said she was done, said she'd found her soulmate, said she'd spent too many years shrinking herself beside a man who didn't understand her potential. She said she was moving in with him immediately, and for the first time in years, she felt excited about her future. She said this house felt like a prison. She said my life was too small, too routine, too safe. I remember that word, safe. She said it like it was an insult. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't ask her to stay. Part of that was shock. Part of it was that I'd seen enough over the last year to know this wasn't some impulsive meltdown. This had been building for a long time. Claire had been pulling away in small, sharp pieces. She stopped cooking, stopped asking about my day, stopped pretending to care about anything that didn't come with a title, a bonus, or a luxury hotel lobby. If I talked about work, she looked bored. If she talked about hers, it was always the same names, the same world. Top performers, big deals, private clubs, executive dinners, first-class flights. Somewhere along the line, she stopped seeing me as her husband and started seeing me as the boring infrastructure under her life. I'd tried to fix it before it got here. I suggested counseling. She said she didn't have time. I booked dinners at restaurants she used to love. She spent half the meal checking email under the table. I planned a weekend away once, just the two of us, and she canceled because of a client emergency that somehow turned into drinks with coworkers in San Francisco. Every time I reached for her, she made me feel like I was interrupting something more important. So when she stood there in my kitchen, telling me she had a better future waiting for her, I wasn't surprised she was leaving. I was surprised by how sure she sounded, like everything had already been arranged, like someone was waiting with the door open and the lights on, like she had a place to land. That was the part I didn't believe. She grabbed the suitcase handle and walked out without looking back. A few seconds later, I heard her Lexus start in the driveway. Then the tires rolled off and the house went dead quiet. I sat there for another minute staring at the key and the garage remote on the counter. Then I unfolded the sticky note. It said, "I'm done. I'm leaving. Don't contact me." That was the moment my anger settled down and turned into focus. Because Claire was many things, but careless wasn't usually one of them. If she left that note and surrendered her keys, she thought she was stepping cleanly into a new life. She thought she had somewhere permanent to go, and something in my gut told me she was running on ego, not facts. Then the kitchen iPad lit up beside the coffee maker. A text notification popped onto the screen, and the name at the top told me exactly who she thought was waiting for her on the other side of this stunt. I picked up the iPad and just stared at it for a second. Claire had replaced that thing 2 years earlier and treated it like a kitchen appliance after that. Recipes, weather, music, grocery lists. But she'd never logged out of anything. Her messages were still synced. Her email was still open. Even the passcode was the same 4 numbers we'd used for years. Our anniversary. That almost made me laugh. The message preview was from Graham Cole. I didn't know his name yet, but I knew what he was the second I saw the tone. It wasn't work. It wasn't professional. It was casual in a way married people recognize instantly. Too familiar. Too easy. I unlocked the screen, opened the thread, and sat back down with my cold coffee while my marriage unfolded in full detail right there in my hands. The affair had been going on for 4 months. It started clean enough. Meeting follow-ups, demo talk, scheduling. Then it turned. Drinks after a meeting, private jokes, late-night texts. She started feeding him the same script people always use when they want permission to betray somebody. My husband doesn't really get me. We've been disconnected for years. He's a good man, but he's not my person. I read line after line of my wife turning me into a cardboard cutout so she could feel better about what she was doing. And Graham played his role perfectly. He told her she was brilliant, said she was wasted in the small life, called her magnetic, called her rare. Every message was built to keep her leaning in. He never said too much, never promised too much, just enough to keep the fantasy alive. And Claire, being Claire, did the rest of the work for him. She filled in every blank with whatever made her feel chosen. I kept scrolling. There were hotel reservations disguised as business trips, dinner receipts, photos I wish I'd never seen. Nothing graphic, just the kind of smiling, intimate pictures that tell you exactly where you stand. In one exchange, she mocked the way I dress. In another, she made fun of my truck. She told him I was solid but forgettable. That phrase stayed with me, solid but forgettable. 21 years together, and that's what I was in her private version of our life. Then I found the messages about that morning. She had been planning this exit for weeks. They had an actual name for it, Freedom Day. She'd been counting down to it like a teenager waiting for spring break. She told him her bonus had finally hit. She said she'd moved half of it into a separate account. She said she was bringing her things over Wednesday, and that once she was out of my house, she never planned to look back. That should have been the part that broke me. It wasn't. The part that got my attention was Graham's side of the conversation. Claire was talking like the move was settled. Graham wasn't. Her messages were direct. I can't wait to wake up in your place every day. I'll bring the suitcases in one trip. I'm finally done pretending. His replies were soft and slippery. Can't wait to see you. Today's a big day. We'll figure it out. That last one jumped out at me. We'll figure it out. That's not what a man says when he's waiting at home for his new live-in partner. That's what a man says when he wants to avoid saying no without killing the mood. I went back and read the last 2 weeks again, slower this time. Claire kept assuming, Graham kept dodging. She talked about drawer space, closet space, mornings together, shared routines. He kept steering the conversation toward drinks, hotel nights, and vague future talk. He had never once told her to bring her bags, never once offered a key, never once said, yes, move in with me. That was when the whole thing changed for me. Up until then, I thought I was watching my wife leave me for another man who had a better offer. But that's not what this was. Claire hadn't been invited into some glamorous new life. She'd sold her house seat and burned the bridge behind her based on a fantasy she created in her own head. She thought she was stepping into a penthouse. From what I was reading, she was about to walk into a lobby with luggage and no actual place to go. At 10:15 a.m., another message came in, live while I was holding the iPad. I'm downstairs. I did it. I left him. I'm here. I set the coffee down and kept watching. I watched the screen like it was a security feed. At 10:15 a.m., Claire texted Graham from his building lobby, telling him she was downstairs, she'd done it, and she was ready. That alone told me how deep her delusion ran. She wasn't asking if it was still okay. She wasn't checking whether the timing worked. She was announcing her arrival like a woman stepping into the next chapter of her life.
Nothing came back for almost 10 minutes.
Then the typing dots appeared, stopped, appeared again, stopped again. That hesitation told me more than any confession could have. Claire sent another text, "Are you tied up?" Then another one, "I'm by the fountain with my bags." The image of it hit me so hard I could see it without being there. My wife in that polished business outfit, luggage stacked beside her, sitting in some sleek luxury lobby like she belonged there, waiting for a man who had never actually told her to move in. She had left a marriage, surrendered her keys, and driven away from her own house, all based on her own interpretation of a fantasy relationship. At 11:30 a.m., Graham finally answered. "What are you doing here?" That was it. No baby, no excitement, no "come on up." Just 6 words that landed like a slap. I actually leaned back in my chair when I read it, because in that moment, the whole structure collapsed. Claire texted back immediately, "I told you, it's Freedom Day. I left him. I'm moving in." The response came 2 minutes later. "Whoa, slow down. We never said you were moving in. I'm in meetings all day. You can't just show up with luggage." I read that message 3 times. Not because it was complicated, but because it was so brutally ordinary. That was the reality. No grand betrayal triangle, no soulmate standing on a balcony waiting for her with champagne. Just a 50-something executive who liked having an affair and suddenly wanted no part of the consequences. Claire's next few texts came fast and messy. "What are you talking about? We talked about our future. I left my husband. I gave up my house. I have nowhere else to go." And then Graham sent the message that ended whatever was left of her fantasy. "That was your choice. I like what we have, but I'm not looking for a live-in situation. You need to figure something else out." I set the iPad down after that and just stared at the countertop. Not because I felt sorry for her. I didn't. What I felt was something colder, final. For months she had treated me like the lesser option, like the plain, dependable husband she had outgrown. She mocked my job, my habits, my truck, my whole way of living. She had built this glamorous exit in her head where she walked out on the boring man and straight into a better life. But the better life didn't even have room for her suitcase. By noon, her messages had turned desperate. She was trying to reason with him, then guilt him, then pressure him. He stopped responding. No more typing dots, no soft letdown, just silence. She had blown up her own life, and the man she did it for couldn't even give her a decent rejection. He just disappeared. That was when my phone buzzed. Her name lit up on the screen. 1 word. "Hey." I almost admired the nerve of it. After everything she'd said that morning, after the note, the keys, the speech about wasted years and soulmates, she sends me, "Hey," like she's checking in about dry cleaning. I didn't answer. 10 minutes later, she called. I let it ring out. Then another text came in. "Can we talk?" No apology, no explanation, no admission. Just a soft little test to see if the door she slammed on her way out was still unlocked. That was the moment I stopped being shocked and started making decisions. First thing I did was walk straight to the garage door keypad and change the code. Then I called the alarm company and updated the master password. After that, I logged into our banking apps and froze every joint card tied directly to my name. Not out of panic, out of sequence. Claire always underestimated what I did for a living because logistics didn't impress her. But logistics is just another word for understanding systems, dependencies, timing, and what happens when one moving part fails. And Claire had just made the biggest unforced error of her life in front of a man who understood process. At 3 p.m., another text came through. "I think I made a mistake. I'm coming home." I read it once, then read it again, and the part that stuck with me was not mistake, it was home. She still thought she could leave at 9 a.m., get rejected by lunch, and reclaim the house by dinner like none of it counted. Like marriage was a hotel reservation she could cancel and reactivate based on mood. I sent back one message. "You don't live here anymore." Then I waited for her to test whether I meant it. She answered almost instantly. "Don't be ridiculous. It's my house too. I'm coming home." There was no apology in it, no shame, no pleas, just entitlement. That was Claire all over. Even after getting rejected by the man she blew up our marriage for, she still thought she got to decide the terms. She still thought she could announce a new reality and everyone else would have to adjust around her. Around 4 p.m., the rain started. Just a cold gray drizzle at first, enough to make the windows look dirty. I was sitting in the darkened living room where I could see the front drive without being obvious from outside. When her Lexus pulled in, I didn't move. She got out fast, still in the same outfit, but it didn't look sharp anymore. The blazer looked damp. Her hair had started to frizz around the edges. She marched to the front door like she was still operating on momentum, still telling herself this could be fixed if she acted confident enough. Then, she reached into her purse for the key she no longer had. You could see the exact moment it hit her. Her hand stopped, her shoulders tightened. She checked the purse again, even though she knew. Then she stepped back from the door and stared at it like the house had betrayed her. She rang the bell once, then again. Then she leaned on it. I stayed where I was. A few seconds later, she started pounding on the door. "Ethan, open the door!" I still didn't move. She pounded again, harder this time, then called my phone from the porch. I let it ring. Then she started yelling through the wood like volume could undo what she had done 6 hours earlier. Finally, I walked over, but not to open it. I checked the camera feed on my phone first. She was soaked at the shoulders, mascara starting to blur under her eyes, one heel digging into the wet welcome mat while her suitcases sat behind her like evidence. I spoke through the doorbell speaker. "What?" Her whole tone changed the second she heard my voice. It dropped from rage to forced control. "Open the door. We need to talk." "No," I said. She looked up at the camera, stunned for half a second, like she still couldn't believe I was serious. "Stop this. I live here." "No, you don't," I said. "You left." I was upset. "You packed your bags, turned in your keys, left a note, and told me not to contact you." "That doesn't mean I moved out." "It means exactly that." Then the mask came off. "Are you seriously doing this because of one fight?" That was the moment I knew she still didn't get it. In her mind, the real offense here was not the affair, not the humiliation, not the months of lies. It was me refusing to go back into my assigned role once her backup plan failed. I said, "You don't get to leave your husband for another man at 9 a.m. and come back at 4 p.m. because he didn't want you." Another silence. Not long, maybe 2 seconds, but it was enough. Enough for her face to change. Enough for her to realize I knew. Then she tried the lie anyway. "He is not my boyfriend." I read the messages on the kitchen iPad. That hit harder than yelling would have. She stepped back from the door and just stared up at the camera. Rainwater was dripping off her hair now. She looked smaller. Not innocent, not sympathetic, just exposed. Her voice changed again, softer this time. "Ethan, please, it's raining." I didn't answer. "I have nowhere to go." "Use your money," I said. She snapped back immediately. "The transfer hasn't cleared yet." That actually made me laugh, and I hated that it did. That sounds like a logistics problem. She banged on the door one more time and shouted my name. Then, when that didn't work, she reached for the one thing she thought would force my hand. "I'm calling the police." I said, "Do what you need to do." About 30 minutes later, a patrol car pulled into the driveway. And for one brief second, watching Claire stand taller behind it like she'd just found reinforcements, I realized she really believed the uniforms were going to hand her the house back. 2 officers came up the walk while Claire stood behind them on the lawn with her arms folded tight across her chest, soaked, furious, and somehow still convinced she was about to win. I opened the door before they knocked a second time. I was calm, fully dressed, and polite. That mattered. In moments like that, the first person who looks unstable usually loses ground fast, and Claire had already spent the day setting herself on fire. One of the officers explained that my wife said I had locked her out of her own home. Claire jumped in before he even finished and said I was being vindictive, irrational, and emotionally abusive. She said we'd had an argument, she left to cool off, and now I was refusing to let her back in. It was a decent performance if you hadn't seen the luggage, the note, the surrendered keys, and the text where she announced she was leaving me for another man. I told the officers I had no problem explaining everything, and then I did it in order. I told them she packed her belongings that morning. I told them she said she was done, that she was moving out, and that she placed her key and garage remote on the counter before leaving. Then I took out my phone and showed them the photo I'd taken right after she drove away. Clear image, granite countertop, house key, garage remote, sticky note, timestamp. Everything I'd need if the rest of the day went sideways. The older officer looked at the photo for a long moment, then asked Claire, "Did you leave your keys?" She hesitated. "I put them down because I was upset." He asked, "Did you tell him you were leaving?" Another pause. I said things in anger. He looked back at the photo, then at the suitcases still sitting by her car in the rain. That was the problem with dramatic exits. They leave evidence. Claire wanted this to be reclassified as a fight because the alternative was admitting she'd voluntarily walked out and expected to come back only after her other plan collapsed. The officers stepped a little aside and spoke quietly with each other. Claire kept trying to push her version of the story. She said she'd lived there for over 20 years. She said all her clothes were inside. She said her husband was trying to punish her. None of that changed the one fact she couldn't talk around. She had surrendered possession herself. They couldn't force me to open the house without a court order, and the older officer finally told her exactly that. Then he turned to me and asked, careful and professional, whether I'd be willing to let her in for the night to avoid making the situation worse. I said no. Not loudly, not emotionally, just no. He asked if there was a reason beyond the argument. I said yes. I said she had been planning this exit for months, that she had already moved money, that she had announced she was leaving the marriage, and that I did not feel safe bringing that level of chaos back into the house. I didn't mention the affair messages in detail because I didn't need to. I just needed to make one thing clear. This was not some misunderstanding. This was a line she crossed on purpose. Claire stared at me like she'd never heard me say no before. Maybe she hadn't. Not like that. The officer gave her the only answer he legally could. He told her this was a civil matter now. He told her to get a hotel, call a lawyer in the morning, and arrange retrieval of any necessary belongings through the proper channels. Claire started crying then, partly from panic, partly because tears had always worked on somebody. Not this time. She said her cards weren't working. I told the officer she had transferred money into a separate account before leaving. He nodded like that explained enough. The patrol car pulled away at around 5:30 p.m., and Claire just stood there in the driveway watching it go. No more attitude, no more speeches about soulmates or wasted potential. Just a drenched woman in expensive clothes realizing the law was not going to rescue her from her own decisions. I watched from the window as she got back into her Lexus and sat there without starting it. It got dark. The rain kept falling. Streetlights came on. Every now and then, the dashboard lit up her face when she checked her phone. Probably trying Graham again. probably getting nothing. For the first time all day, the reality finally matched the choice she made that morning. She stayed in that car the entire night, parked in the driveway of the house she thought she could leave and reclaim on command. And the next morning, when she finally drove off, I made the call that turned this from a bad marriage into a legal war. The next morning, after Claire finally pulled out of the driveway, I called Daniel Ross, the attorney a friend had recommended to me 3 years earlier when his own divorce got ugly. By 9 a.m., I was in Daniel's office with my phone, the photo of the keys, the note, screenshots of the text thread from the iPad, and a printed timeline of everything that had happened the day before. That last part made him smile a little. He said most people show up with emotions. I showed up with records. In my world, if something matters, you document it. And after 21 years with Claire, I had no interest in letting her rewrite the facts into something softer and more flattering. Daniel moved fast. He filed for separation and filed a motion for exclusive possession of the house. Claire's dramatic exit, the written note, the surrendered keys, the police call, and the officer's report all helped. So did the financial trail she'd left behind. Once we started digging, the truth got uglier in a different way. It turned out the private account she'd bragged about wasn't enough to support the life she'd been pretending she could afford. My attorney uncovered a secret line of credit opened in my name months earlier. $12,000. Hotels, dinners, gifts, travel, club charges, all of it tied back to the affair. She hadn't just betrayed me emotionally, she'd used marital money to fund the fantasy. And some of that money wasn't even really hers. That discovery changed everything. What had started as a personal betrayal turned into a financial one too. And courts care a lot about math. Daniel explained dissipation of assets to me in plain English. If she spent family money helping another man play rich boyfriend, that amount could come out of her side of the final settlement. Claire had spent months acting like she was the one with all the power. All the leverage, all the options. But the second the paperwork started, all those little decisions she thought were clever became evidence. The lies, the transfer, the cards, the hidden debt, the affair expenses. Piece by piece, the image she'd built of herself as the brilliant one started collapsing under the weight of receipts. 2 weeks later, the judge granted the temporary order. Claire was barred from entering the property except with law enforcement to collect essentials. When she came back with deputies and a rented truck, she looked nothing like the woman who'd clicked across my kitchen tile in heels and told me she'd found her soulmate. She looked tired, worn down, cheap motel tired. She loaded boxes in sweatpants while 2 deputies stood nearby and I sat on the porch checking the weather on my phone. She kept trying to catch my eye. I never gave her that moment. Some people hear that and think it's cold. Maybe it is. But there comes a point where looking at somebody with sympathy just teaches them they still have access to you. The last real update came through court filings. Claire had rented a tiny studio apartment on the bad side of town, month to month. Graham had cut her off completely and, according to her own attorney, had security remove her from his office after she tried to show up and clear up the misunderstanding. That part almost said everything by itself. There was no misunderstanding. He knew exactly what he was doing, and eventually, so did she. She lost the husband she looked down on, the house she treated like a prison, the image she worked so hard to maintain, and the man she thought was waiting to upgrade her life. All because she confused attention with commitment and ego with safety. So that's where this ends. I'm still in the house. The locks are changed. The accounts are separated. The quiet in here feels different now. Not empty, clean. I used to think being steady made me boring. Now I think it made me hard to fool once I stopped ignoring what was right in front of me. Claire wanted freedom, and she got it. Just not the version she pictured. If this story hit you, I'd appreciate it if you liked the video, shared it with somebody who needs to hear it, and subscribed for more real stories like this. It really helps the channel, and I'm glad you spent this time with me. I want to hear what you think about this one. At what point do you think the marriage was already over? If somebody leaves, surrenders the keys, and then gets rejected by the affair partner, Do they deserve a way back in? And what was the biggest warning sign here? The arrogance, the financial secrets, or the fact that she assumed another man would catch her before she jumped?